The dented tin cup hit the floor with a hollow clang that echoed through the empty saloon. Caleb Turner barely noticed the whiskey that spilled across his boots, his bleary eyes fixed on nothing in particular, as the familiar burn of alcohol seeped into his veins. The rusty nail had become his second home, or perhaps his only home in the 4 years since he'd lost everything that mattered. "Closing time, Turner," growled Otto, the bartender, wiping down the counter with a grimy rag. "Even the piano player's gone home." Caleb didn't respond. He simply reached for the bottle, pouring another splash of amber liquid into what remained of his cup. His hands, once steady enough to outdraw any man west of the Mississippi, trembled slightly. The calluses that had formed from years of ranch work and gun handling were still there, but the purpose behind them had long since vanished. "You heard me," Otto said, more firmly this time. "It's 1878, and even in a backwater like Redemption, Wyoming, we got rules. Saloon closes at midnight." "Just leave the bottle," Caleb muttered, sliding a few coins across the bar. Otto shook his head but took the money. "One of these days, you're gonna drink yourself straight into a pine box, Turner." "That's the general idea," Caleb replied, the words slurring together as he grabbed the bottle by its neck and staggered toward the door. The night air hit him like a slap to the face as he stumbled onto the boardwalk. Redemption was quiet at this hour, the main street empty except for a few horses tied up outside the hotel and the occasional stray dog scavenging for scraps. The moon hung low over the distant mountains, casting long shadows across the dusty thoroughfare. Caleb made his way to the edge of town where his small cabin stood, a dilapidated structure that barely kept out the rain. It had been adequate 4 years ago when he'd first arrived, looking for a place to disappear. Now it was simply where he passed out each night, surrounded by ghosts of memories he couldn't outrun. As he approached the cabin, he noticed something unusual light flickering through the single window. He stopped, hand instinctively moving to his holster, though the gesture was more habit than intent. He hadn't worn his gun in years. The door creaked open before he reached it, and a woman stepped out onto the porch. Even in his drunken state, Caleb recognized her instantly. "Zara," he whispered, the name feeling foreign on his tongue after so long. Zara Wheeler stood before him, her honey blonde hair pulled back in a simple braid, her blue eyes sharp and clear in the moonlight. She wore a simple traveling dress, dusty from the road, and her expression was one of determination rather than warmth. "Hello, Caleb," she said simply, crossing her arms over her chest. "What in God's name are you doing here?" he asked, his mind struggling to process her presence. Zara Wheeler had been his wife's closest friend. She had no business being in Redemption, and certainly not waiting on his porch in the middle of the night. "I've been looking for you for almost a year," she replied. "Wasn't easy to find a man who doesn't want to be found." Caleb swayed slightly, gripping the whiskey bottle tighter. "Well, now you've found me. What do you want?" "I want to talk to you," she said, stepping aside to indicate the open door. "Though I'd prefer you were sober for the conversation." He let out a harsh laugh. "Then you'll be waiting a mighty long time, Miss Wheeler." He pushed past her, entering the sparse cabin. Inside was exactly as he'd left it, a rickety table with a single chair, a narrow bed in the corner, and a small potbelly stove that had gone cold hours ago. His few possessions were scattered about: dirty clothing, empty bottles, and a single framed photograph lying face down on a shelf. Zara followed him inside, her gaze taking in the squalor with obvious dismay. "This is how you've been living." "What I do is none of your concern," he muttered, collapsing into the chair and taking another swig from his bottle. In a swift movement that caught him completely off guard, Zara crossed the room and snatched the bottle from his hands. Before he could protest, She stepped to the door and upended it, pouring the precious whiskey into the dirt outside. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" Caleb roared, stumbling to his feet. "Something that should have been done years ago," she replied calmly, tossing the empty bottle aside and closing the door. Without hesitation, she pulled the chair away from the table and sat down directly across from where he now stood, her eyes never leaving his face. "Sit down, Caleb. We need to talk." Fury and confusion warred within him as he stared at this woman who had invaded his sanctuary and destroyed his only comfort. "You have no right. I have every right," she interrupted, her voice steady but with an undercurrent of emotion. "I promised Rebecca I would look after you. I've failed that promise for 4 years, but I'm here now." The mention of his wife's name hit him like a physical blow. Caleb sank back down onto the edge of the bed, his anger deflating as quickly as it had risen, leaving only the familiar hollow ache in its place. "Rebecca's been gone 4 years," he said flatly. "Whatever promises you made to her died with her." Zara's expression softened slightly. "That's not how promises work, Caleb, and it's not how love works either." "Don't talk to me about love," he spat. "You don't know a damn thing about what I've lost." "I know exactly what you lost," she replied quietly. "I was there, remember? I held your hand at the funeral. I watched you ride away from everything and everyone who cared about you." Caleb ran a hand through his unkempt hair, the room spinning slightly as the alcohol continued to work through his system. "Why now? Why come looking for me after all this time?" Zara hesitated, her fingers twisting together in her lap. "Because I received a letter from Rebecca's father. He's dying, Caleb, and there are things you need to know." A bitter laugh escaped him. "Old man Prescott never approved of me marrying his daughter. What could he possibly have to say to me now?" "It's not just about what he has to say," Zara replied. "It's about what Rebecca never got the chance to tell you." Something in her tone made Caleb look up sharply. "What are you talking about?" Zara took a deep breath. "You should sleep, Caleb. You're in no state to hear this now. We'll talk in the morning when you're sober." "Tell me," he demanded, but even as the words left his mouth, he could feel the exhaustion and alcohol pulling him under. "Tomorrow," she said firmly, standing up. "I've waited a year to find you. I can wait one more night." As his eyes grew heavy, Caleb watched as Zara moved around the small cabin, stoking the fire in the stove, gathering the empty bottles, straightening what little there was to straighten. The last thing he saw before unconsciousness claimed him was her silhouette against the window, strong and unwavering in the moonlight. When morning came, it arrived with the pounding headache and parched throat that had become Caleb's constant companions. He groaned, pressing the heels of his hands against his eyes to block out the sunlight streaming through the window. The smell of coffee, real coffee, not the weak, burned variety he occasionally managed to brew, filled the cabin. For a moment, he thought he must still be dreaming. Then the events of the previous night came rushing back, and he sat up abruptly. Zara stood at the small stove, her back to him. She'd changed into a simple blouse and skirt, her hair now loose around her shoulders. On the table sat a plate of biscuits and what appeared to be freshly fried bacon. "Where did you get all that?" he asked, his voice rough from sleep and whiskey. She turned, regarding him calmly. "Good morning to you too, Caleb. I brought supplies with me. Figured you probably weren't keeping much food around." He swung his legs over the side of the bed, feeling the familiar craving for alcohol rising within him. "Is there anything stronger than coffee in that pot?" "No," she replied firmly, pouring a cup and bringing it to him. "And there won't be. Not while I'm here." Caleb took the cup, his hands shaking slightly. "And how long do you plan on staying exactly?" "As long as it takes," she said, returning to the stove. "Eat something. You look like you haven't had a proper meal in months." Despite his irritation at her commanding tone, Caleb couldn't deny the gnawing hunger in his stomach. He moved to the table and began eating mechanically, the food tasteless in his mouth, despite being better than anything he'd had in years. "You said something last night," he began after a few minutes of silence, "about Rebecca's father having something to tell me." Zara sat down across from him, her own coffee untouched. "Yes, he wrote to me about 6 months ago. He's got consumption, Caleb. The doctors say he won't last the year." "I'm sorry to hear that," Caleb said, and was surprised to find he meant it. Despite their differences, Jasper Prescott had been a good man who'd loved his daughter fiercely. "He wanted me to find you," Zara continued. "Said there were things you needed to know. Things Rebecca had planned to tell you herself before." Caleb set down his cup, a chill running through him that had nothing to do with the morning air. "What things?" Zara hesitated, her eyes searching his face. "Before I tell you, I need to know something." "How much do you remember about the day Rebecca died?" The question caught him off guard. The day of the raid was both seared into his memory and deliberately blurred by years of whiskey. "Enough," he said tersely. "I remember enough." "Tell me," she insisted, her voice gentle but unyielding. Caleb closed his eyes, the memories he'd fought so hard to drown rising to the surface. "We were at the ranch. I was out checking the north pasture fence when I heard the shots. By the time I got back to the house, they'd already been there. Blackwell's gang. They'd taken everything of value and—" His voice broke. "And they'd killed Rebecca. Shot her when she tried to stop them from taking her mother's jewelry box." Zara was silent for a long moment. "Is that what the sheriff told you?" Caleb's eyes snapped open. "What do you mean? I saw her body, Zara. I buried her myself." "Yes, Rebecca died that day," she said carefully. "But not the way you think, and not alone." A cold feeling spread through Caleb's chest. "What are you saying?" Zara reached across the table, her hand covering his. "Rebecca was with child, Caleb, nearly 4 months along. She'd written to her father about it just a week before the raid. She was waiting to tell you until she was sure everything was progressing well." The world seemed to tilt beneath him. "No," he whispered. "No, that can't be right. She would have told me." "She was going to," Zara insisted. "The very day of the raid. She'd asked me to come over that afternoon to help her prepare a special dinner for you to celebrate the news." Caleb pulled his hand away, standing so abruptly that his chair toppled backward. "You're lying." "Why would you come here after all this time just to torture me with lies?" "I'm not lying, Caleb," Zara said, remaining seated. "Rebecca was carrying your child when she died, but that's not all of it. According to her father's letter, the sheriff's report about what happened that day wasn't entirely accurate." "What do you mean?" "Blackwell's gang was there, yes, but they weren't alone. The sheriff found evidence that someone from town had been working with them, telling them which ranches to hit and when." Caleb stared at her, trying to process this new information through the fog of his hangover and grief. "Who?" "That's what her father wants to tell you himself," Zara replied. "He has names, Caleb, and proof." For the first time in 4 years, Caleb felt something other than despair stirring within him. A spark of the man he'd once been, the man who had built a ranch with his bare hands, who had loved his wife with every fiber of his being, who had dreamed of raising children under the vast Wyoming sky. "How far is it to Prescott's place?" he asked, his voice rough with emotion. 3 days' ride, Zara answered. "I've got horses waiting at the livery." Caleb looked around the squalid cabin that had been his prison for 4 years. "I need to clean up." Zara nodded, relief evident in her expression. "I'll wait outside." As she stood to leave, Caleb caught her arm. "Why did you really come looking for me, Zara? And don't tell me it was just because of some promise to Rebecca or a letter from her father." Her blue eyes met his steadily. "Because everyone deserves a second chance, Caleb, even you, especially you." With that, she slipped outside, leaving him alone with his thoughts and the first stirrings of purpose he'd felt since burying his wife. An hour later, Caleb emerged from the cabin, clean-shaven and dressed in the least worn of his clothes. His hair, still damp from washing, was tied back from his face, revealing features that, while gaunt from years of neglect, still held echoes of the handsome rancher he'd once been. Zara was waiting by the water pump, her small traveling bag at her feet. She looked up as he approached, and something flickered in her eyes, surprise, perhaps, at the transformation even a simple washing had wrought. "Ready?" she asked, picking up her bag. Caleb nodded, his gaze drifting to the empty bottle lying in the dirt where Zara had poured it out the night before. The craving for whiskey was a physical ache, but for the first time in years, there was something stronger pushing against it. "I don't have much to pack," he said. "Just need to stop by the general store for some supplies." They walked in silence toward town, the morning sun beating down on the dusty street. Redemption was coming to life, shopkeepers opening their doors. A wagon loaded with timber rolling toward the new schoolhouse being built at the edge of town. At the general store, Caleb purchased the bare essentials for travel: jerky, coffee, a new shirt, and ammunition for the revolver he hadn't worn in years but still kept in a drawer beside his bed. As he paid, the storekeeper, Mr. Holloway, eyed him with undisguised curiosity. "Going somewhere, Turner?" he asked, glancing between Caleb and Zara. "Just taking a trip," Caleb replied curtly, gathering his purchases. "Well, it's good to see you up and about before sundown for a change," Holloway remarked. "The lady must be a good influence." Caleb ignored the comment, but he felt Zara stiffen beside him. As they left the store, she spoke in a low voice. "Is that how people see you here? As the town drunk?" "It's what I am, isn't it?" Caleb responded, the bitterness creeping back into his tone. "It's what you've become," Zara corrected. "Not who you are." Before he could respond, they reached the livery stable where an older man was brushing down two horses, a sturdy bay gelding and a smaller dappled mare. "Morning, Miss Wheeler," the stableman called. "Got your horses ready as requested." "Thank you, Mr. Daniels," Zara replied. "This is Mr. Turner. He'll be riding with me." The stableman's eyes widened slightly as he recognized Caleb. "Well, I'll be. Haven't seen you on horseback in a spell, Mr. Turner. It's been a while," Caleb admitted, approaching the bay. The horse snorted and tossed its head as he drew near, but settled when he ran a hand along its neck. The familiar feel of horsehide beneath his palm stirred something in him, memories of long rides across open country, the wind in his face, the sense of freedom that came with it. "You still remember how to ride, I hope?" Zara asked, a hint of teasing in her voice as she secured her bag to the mare's saddle. "Some things you don't forget," Caleb replied, gathering the bay's reins. They mounted up and set out, heading east toward the mountains. As they left Redemption behind, Caleb felt the weight of the past 4 years pressing down on him. His body craved whiskey, his mind uncomfortable with clarity. But there was also a sense of movement, of purpose, that had been absent for so long. "Tell me more about this letter," he said as they settled into a steady pace. "What exactly did Jasper Prescott write?" Zara adjusted her hat against the sun. "He wrote that he'd been going through Rebecca's things and found her journal. In it, she mentioned being worried about someone in town, someone who'd been asking a lot of questions about which ranches had the most valuable stock when people would be away from their homes. She didn't name names in her journal, but she'd apparently told her father her suspicions when he visited the week before the raid. And he never mentioned this to me or the sheriff?" Caleb asked incredulously. He said he told the sheriff, but nothing came of it. As for not telling you." She hesitated. "He said you were in no state to hear it after the funeral. By the time he thought you might be ready, you disappeared." Caleb absorbed this in silence. He remembered little of the days following Rebecca's death, just a blur of grief and rage, culminating in his decision to ride away from the charred remains of their ranch, away from the memories, away from everything they'd built together. "There's something else you should know," Zara added after a while. "After you left, Jasper sold what was left of your ranch land. He's been holding the money for you all these years. It's part of why he wants to see you before he passes, to make sure you get what's rightfully yours." The news hit Caleb like a physical blow. The land had been his dream, the future he'd planned with Rebecca. To hear it had been sold, even though he'd abandoned it, stirred a complex mix of emotions. "I don't want his money," he said roughly. "It's not about the money, Caleb," Zara replied. "It's about making things right, about honoring what you and Rebecca built together." They rode in silence after that, each lost in their own thoughts as the sun climbed higher in the sky. By midday, they'd reached the foothills, the terrain gradually changing from open plains to rocky slopes dotted with pine and aspen. They stopped by a small stream to rest the horses and eat some of the provisions. Caleb found himself watching Zara as she moved with efficient grace, setting out their simple meal, checking the horses' hooves for stones. There was a quiet strength to her that he'd never fully appreciated before. "You've changed," he observed as they sat in the shade of a tall pine. Zara looked up, surprised. "Have I? You were always so proper. Rebecca used to tease you about it. Said you were the most ladylike person she'd ever met, who could also birth a calf and shoot a rattlesnake at 20 paces. A smile touched Zara's lips at the memory. Rebecca always saw the contradictions in people. It's what made her so easy to talk to. "Yes," Caleb agreed softly. "It was. Life changes us all," Zara continued after a moment. "After she died, I realized how short our time here really is. Decided I wasn't going to waste it worrying about what other people thought of me." "Is that why you never married?" Caleb asked, then immediately regretted the personal question. But Zara didn't seem offended. "Partly. Never met a man who seemed worth giving up my independence for." She met his eyes directly. "What about you? Why did you choose whiskey instead of living?" The bluntness of the question caught him off guard. "I was living," he said defensively. "No," she countered. "You were existing. There's a difference." Before he could respond, she stood and began packing up their things. "We should keep moving if we want to make it to the Wilson Creek crossing by nightfall." They traveled through the afternoon, the terrain growing more challenging as they climbed higher into the foothills. Caleb felt the physical strain in muscles long unused to anything more strenuous than lifting a bottle. But there was a satisfaction in it, too, a reminder that his body was still capable of more than he'd asked of it in years. As the sun began to set, they reached Wilson Creek, a swift-flowing stream bordered by cottonwoods. On the far bank stood a small way station, little more than a stable, a bunkhouse, and a cookhouse where travelers could find a hot meal and a place to sleep. "Have you stayed here before?" Caleb asked as they approached. "Twice," Zara replied. "On my way to and from Redemption. The owner, Mrs. Blackburn, is a widow who runs the place with her son. They're good people." The way station was just as Zara had described. Mrs. Blackburn, a sturdy woman in her 50s with iron-gray hair and capable hands, welcomed them warmly and directed her son, a young man of about 20, to take care of their horses. "You're just in time for supper," she informed them, leading the way to the cookhouse where several other travelers were already seated at a long table. "Got venison stew tonight, fresh baked bread, and apple pie for those who clean their plates." The meal was simple but delicious, and Caleb found himself eating with more appetite than he'd had in years. The other guests, a family heading west to Oregon, a cattle buyer returning from a successful trip, and a young drummer selling sewing machines kept the conversation lively, though Caleb contributed little. After dinner, Mrs. Blackburn showed them to the bunkhouse. "Got 2 rooms available tonight," she said. "One at each end of the hall, I'm afraid, but they're clean and the beds are comfortable." "That will be fine," Zara assured her, paying for both rooms despite Caleb's protest. When they were alone in the narrow hallway between rooms, Caleb finally asked the question that had been bothering him all day. "Why did you really come looking for me, Zara? The truth this time?" She met his gaze steadily. "I told you the truth. Jasper Prescott is dying and wanted me to find you." "But why you? Why not send a lawyer or a marshal?" "Because he knew I would actually look," she replied simply. "And because he knew if anyone could convince you to come back, it would be me." "Why would he think that?" A slight flush colored her cheeks. "Because he knows I cared about you. Not just as Rebecca's husband, but as someone I respected." There was more to it than that, Caleb sensed, but Zara quickly changed the subject. "We should get some rest. It's another long day of riding tomorrow." Before he could press further, she'd slipped into her room and closed the door, leaving him alone with his thoughts and the growing realization of just how much he'd missed human connection over the past 4 years. In his own room, Caleb found himself unable to sleep despite the comfortable bed. His body ached for whiskey, his mind racing with all that Zara had told him. Rebecca had been carrying his child. Someone in town had helped plan the raid that took her life. Jasper Prescott had evidence, names. And beneath it all, the nagging question: what would he do with this information once he had it? 4 years ago, he would have known immediately. He would have hunted down every last person responsible and made them pay. But now he wasn't sure what kind of man he was anymore, or what kind of justice he was capable of seeking. As dawn broke, Caleb gave up on sleep and made his way to the cookhouse, where Mrs. Blackburn was already preparing breakfast. She looked up as he entered, taking in his haggard appearance with a knowing eye. "Coffee's hot," she said, nodding toward a pot on the stove. "Breakfast won't be ready for another half hour, but you're welcome to wait." "Thank you," Caleb replied, pouring himself a cup. The rich aroma reminded him of mornings on the ranch, of Rebecca humming as she cooked, of a life that seemed to belong to someone else now. "Your wife is a determined woman," Mrs. Blackburn remarked as she kneaded dough for biscuits. Caleb nearly choked on his coffee. "She's not my wife." The older woman raised an eyebrow. "No, my mistake. The way she talked about you, I just assumed." "How did she talk about me?" Caleb found himself asking before he could stop himself. Mrs. Blackburn smiled slightly. "Like someone worth saving." She turned back to her dough. "Don't often see that kind of faith these days, especially not from a woman as self-sufficient as that one." Before Caleb could respond, the door opened and Zara herself entered, dressed and ready for the day's journey. She looked surprised to see him up so early. "You're already awake," she observed, accepting a cup of coffee from Mrs. Blackburn with a grateful nod. "Couldn't sleep," Caleb admitted. "The whiskey?" she asked quietly, sitting across from him. He nodded. "Among other things." Their eyes met over the rim of their cups, and something passed between them, an understanding, perhaps, or the beginning of one. Breakfast was a quick affair, and they were on the trail again before the sun had fully cleared the eastern mountains. The day stretched before them, long and arduous as they navigated increasingly rugged terrain. By mid-afternoon, dark clouds had gathered, and the first fat droplets of rain began to fall. "There's a line shack about 2 miles ahead," Zara called over the rising wind. used by the Double R Ranch hands when they're working this part of the range. We can shelter there until the storm passes." They urged their horses forward, the rain growing heavier with each passing minute. By the time the small cabin came into view, they were both soaked to the skin, the horses slipping on the muddy trail. The line shack was crude but sound, a single room with a small wood stove, a rough-hewn table, 2 chairs, and a narrow cot. Zara tended to the horses in the lean-to shelter attached to the cabin while Caleb got a fire started in the stove. "The horses should be fine," Zara said as she entered, water streaming from her clothing. "But we won't be going anywhere until this passes." Caleb nodded, adding another stick to the growing fire. "Looks like we'll be here a while. That's a Wyoming gully washer if I've ever seen one." Zara began unpacking their saddlebags, laying out what food they had. "At least we won't go hungry, and there's plenty of firewood stacked outside." As they settled in to wait out the storm, an awkward silence fell between them. Caleb found himself acutely aware of Zara in a way he hadn't been before, the way she moved with quiet efficiency. The curve of her neck as she bent to adjust her damp boots. The slight furrow between her brows as she concentrated on slicing jerky for their meal. "You should change into something dry," he said finally, noticing how she shivered despite the growing warmth from the stove. "I will if you will," she replied, the ghost of a smile playing at her lips. "You look like a drowned rat." For the first time in longer than he could remember, Caleb felt the urge to smile back. Fair enough. They took turns changing behind a blanket hung from the rafters for privacy. Caleb put on his only spare shirt and pants, while Zara emerged in a simple blouse and skirt, her damp hair loose around her shoulders. As night fell, the storm showed no signs of abating. Rain lashed against the small window, and thunder rolled across the mountains. They ate a simple meal by the light of a single lantern they'd found on a shelf, the atmosphere between them gradually relaxing as they shared stories of their lives before grief had sent them on such different paths. "Remember that harvest dance?" Zara asked, wrapping her hands around a cup of hot coffee. "The one where Rebecca convinced half the town that you were some famous dancer from back east," Caleb chuckled despite himself. "I had to hide in the stable for an hour while every unmarried woman in 3 counties tried to find me for a waltz." "Rebecca laughed so hard she cried," Zara recalled, her eyes soft with the memory. "She loved a good prank," Caleb agreed, the ache of loss momentarily overshadowed by the warmth of remembrance. "She loved you," Zara said quietly, "more than anything." Caleb looked down at his hands. "I let her down. I should have been there that day." "If I'd been at the house instead of checking fences, you might be dead too," Zara interrupted firmly. "And what good would that have done?" "Better than what I've done these past 4 years, he muttered. Zara reached across the table, her fingers brushing his. "It's not too late to make a different choice, Caleb." The touch of her hand sent an unexpected jolt through him. He pulled away, standing abruptly. "We should get some sleep. You take the cot. I'll manage with blankets by the stove." Zara looked as if she wanted to say more, but instead nodded. "All right, but Caleb, you don't have to keep punishing yourself. Rebecca wouldn't have wanted that." "You don't know what she would have wanted," he said, more harshly than he intended. "Actually, I do," Zara replied, her voice steady. "She told me once that if anything ever happened to her, she hoped you would find happiness again. She said you had too much love to give to spend your life alone." The words hit him like a physical blow. "She said that?" "Yes," Zara confirmed. "About a month before she died, we were helping Mrs. Peterson after her husband passed, and it got us talking about what comes after, for those left behind." Caleb turned away, unable to bear the compassion in Zara's eyes. "Get some sleep," he said roughly. "We've got a long ride tomorrow." He made himself a pallet near the stove, listening as Zara settled onto the cot. The storm continued to rage outside, a fitting backdrop to the turmoil within him. For 4 years, he'd held onto his grief like a shield, using it to keep the world at bay. Now, faced with Zara's quiet strength and the memory of Rebecca's wishes, that shield was beginning to crack. As sleep finally claimed him, his last thought was of Rebecca's face, not as he usually remembered her, pale and still in death, but laughing, full of life, telling him to love again. Morning brought clear skies and a renewed sense of purpose. They set out early, pushing the horses as much as the muddy trails would allow. By late afternoon, they crested a rise, and Caleb saw a familiar landscape spread out before them, rolling hills dotted with cattle, fields of wheat rippling in the breeze, and in the distance, a 2-story farmhouse with a wide front porch. "Prescott's place," he murmured, unexpected emotion tightening his throat. "Yes," Zara confirmed. "Jasper sold his ranch in town after Rebecca died, said he couldn't bear to be so close to where it happened. He bought this place about 3 years ago." As they approached the house, Caleb felt a growing apprehension. He hadn't seen Jasper Prescott since Rebecca's funeral, where the older man's grief had matched his own in intensity if not in expression. What would he find now? What would Jasper see when he looked at the broken shell of the man his daughter had married? A young woman emerged from the house as they rode into the yard. She shaded her eyes against the setting sun, then waved in recognition. "Miss Wheeler, thank goodness you're back. We were starting to worry." "Hello, Nancy," Zara called, dismounting. "The storm delayed us. How is Mr. Prescott?" The young woman, presumably a nurse or housekeeper, glanced at Caleb with open curiosity. "About the same. He's been asking for you and—" "Is this him, then?" "Yes," Zara replied, helping Caleb unsaddle the horses. "This is Mr. Turner. Caleb, this is Nancy Sullivan. She's been caring for Jasper these past few months." Caleb nodded in greeting, unable to find words as the reality of the situation settled over him. He was about to face the father of the woman he'd loved and lost, the grandfather of the child he'd never known about. "He's in the parlor," Nancy said, leading them toward the house. "It's where he spends most of his time now. The view of the mountains reminds him of home, he says." The house was comfortable and well appointed, though Caleb noticed several adjustments that had clearly been made for an invalid. A bed set up in what had once been a formal dining room, handrails along the hallway, medicines arranged neatly on a side table. Nancy paused at a doorway. "I'll let him know you're here," she said, disappearing inside. Caleb stood frozen in the hallway, suddenly uncertain. Zara's hand found his arm, squeezing gently in reassurance. "It's all right," she murmured. "He's been waiting for this." Before Caleb could respond, Nancy reappeared. "He's ready to see you now," she said, holding the door open. The parlor was bathed in the golden light of the setting sun. Jasper Prescott sat in a wheeled chair by the window, a blanket over his legs despite the warmth of the day. He had aged dramatically in the 4 years. Since Caleb had last seen him, his once robust frame now thin and stooped, his thick gray hair reduced to wispy strands. But his eyes, Rebecca's eyes, were as sharp and alert as ever as they fixed on Caleb. "So," the old man said, his voice surprisingly strong, "you finally decided to rejoin the land of the living." Caleb stepped forward, hat in hand. "Mr. Prescott, I came as soon as I heard you wanted to see me." Jasper's gaze flickered to Zara. "Thank you for finding him, my dear. I was beginning to think he'd vanished off the face of the earth." "He wasn't easy to track down," Zara admitted, "but I'm persistent." "That you are," Jasper agreed with a small smile. "Would you mind giving us a few minutes alone? Nancy can show you to your room." "You must be tired after your journey." Zara hesitated, looking to Caleb. "It's all right," he assured her. "I'll be fine." After she'd gone, Jasper gestured to a chair across from his. "Sit down, son. We have much to discuss, and I'm afraid my time is growing short." Caleb sat, studying the man who had once been his father-in-law. Despite his illness, there was still a formidable presence about Jasper Prescott, a man who had built his fortune through determination and grit, who had raised a daughter as strong and vibrant as Rebecca. "Zara told me about the baby," Caleb said, his voice rough with emotion. "Why didn't anyone tell me?" Jasper's expression softened. "Rebecca wanted to tell you herself. She was so excited, planning how to surprise you, and afterward, well, you weren't in any state to hear it. By the time I thought you might be ready, you disappeared." "I'm sorry," Caleb said, the words inadequate for all they needed to cover, "for running away, for not being there when I buried my daughter and my grandchild," Jasper finished for him. "Yes, I was angry about that for a long time, but grief makes us do strange things, Caleb. I've come to understand that over the years." He reached for a small box on the table beside him, his movements slow and deliberate. "Do you know why I asked Zara to find you?" "She said you had information about the raid, about who might have been involved." Jasper nodded, opening the box and removing a folded piece of paper. "I do, but that's only part of it. The truth is, I'm dying, Caleb, and I didn't want to go to my grave with unfinished business between us." He handed the paper to Caleb. "This is a copy of the deed to your old ranch land. I bought it after you left, kept it in trust. It's yours now if you want it." Caleb stared at the document in shock. "I don't understand." "Rebecca loved that land almost as much as she loved you," Jasper explained. "It broke my heart to see it abandoned after all the work you two put into it. So I bought it, had the house rebuilt, kept it running these past 4 years." "Why would you do that?" Caleb asked, genuinely bewildered. "Because it was what Rebecca would have wanted," Jasper replied simply. "And because I hoped that one day you'd find your way back to it, back to life." Caleb looked down at the deed, emotions warring within him. "I don't know if I can go back there, not after everything that happened." "You don't have to decide now," Jasper assured him. "The land isn't going anywhere, but there's something else you need to know, something more urgent." He took another paper from the box, this one looking like a letter. "About 6 months ago, I received this from a man named Carlton Lewis. He was a deputy in Redemption around the time of the raid, but moved away shortly after. He's dying 2 liver disease and wanted to clear his conscience." Caleb took the letter, scanning its contents with growing disbelief. "This says the sheriff knew about the raid beforehand. That he was working with Blackwell's gang." "Yes," Jasper confirmed grimly. "Sheriff Donnelly. He's been helping outlaws target isolated ranches for years, apparently, telling them when owners would be away which places had the most valuable items." Rebecca suspected something, according to her journal. She'd noticed Donnelly asking odd questions, showing up at the ranch unexpectedly. "And he's still sheriff in Redemption," Caleb said, anger beginning to burn through the numbness of shock. "He is," Jasper agreed, with no one to challenge him. Carlton was too afraid to speak up while he was still in town, and by the time he wrote to me, he was too sick to do anything about it himself. "So that's why you wanted me to come back," Caleb realized. "To go after Donnelly." "Partly," Jasper admitted. "Justice for Rebecca and your child is long overdue. But more than that, I wanted you to know the truth, and I wanted to see for myself what kind of man you've become." "And what do you see?" Caleb asked, unable to keep the bitterness from his voice. Jasper studied him for a long moment. "I see a man who's been drowning his pain instead of facing it. But I also see the man my daughter fell in love with somewhere beneath all that grief and whiskey. The question is, can you see him too?" The conversation continued late into the evening. Jasper sharing everything he knew about Sheriff Donnelly's involvement with Blackwell's gang and the raids that had terrorized the region for years. When they finally parted for the night, Caleb's mind was reeling with all he'd learned. He found Zara waiting for him on the front porch, a shawl wrapped around her shoulders against the night chill. "How did it go?" she asked as he sat beside her on the porch swing. "Better than I expected," Caleb admitted. "He's not as angry as he has every right to be." "Jasper Prescott is many things, but he's not a man to hold on to bitterness," Zara observed. "Life's too short for that, as he's well aware now." Caleb nodded, looking out at the starlit landscape. "He told me about Sheriff Donnelly, about his involvement with the gang that killed Rebecca." "Yes," Zara said quietly, "I know. It's why I was so determined to find you. Someone needs to stop him before more people get hurt. And you think that someone should be me? I think you deserve the chance to make that choice," she replied. "After being denied the truth for so long." They sat in companionable silence for a while, the gentle creaking of the swing the only sound besides the distant call of a night bird. "He's given me back the ranch," Caleb said finally. "Had it rebuilt after the raid, kept it running all these years." Zara smiled. "I know. I helped him arrange it." "You did?" Caleb turned to look at her in surprise. "Someone had to oversee the rebuilding while he was still in town," she explained. "I've been managing it for him these past few years, making sure everything was done the way Rebecca would have wanted." The revelation stunned him. "Why would you do that?" Zara met his gaze steadily. "Because Rebecca was my dearest friend, because the ranch was her dream as much as yours, and because—" She hesitated, then continued more softly, "because I couldn't bear the thought of all that love and work just disappearing." Something shifted between them in that moment, a recognition of shared purpose, of a connection deeper than Caleb had allowed himself to acknowledge. "What happens now?" he asked, unsure if he was referring to the ranch, to Donnelly, or to something else entirely. "That depends on you," Zara replied. "On what kind of man you want to be going forward." The question echoed Jasper's earlier words, challenging Caleb to look beyond the grief and guilt that had defined him for so long. For the first time in 4 years, he found himself considering a future not just the next drink or the next day, but weeks and months ahead. "I don't know if I can be the man I was before," he admitted, the confession easier in the darkness. "No one's asking you to be," Zara said gently. "We're all changed by our losses, Caleb. The question is whether we let them destroy us or strengthen us." Her words struck a chord deep within him. He thought of the whiskey that had been his constant companion, of the emptiness it had failed to fill, of the life he'd abandoned in his despair. "I want to be better," he said finally, the words feeling like a promise. "For Rebecca's memory, for myself." Zara's hand found his on the swing between them, her touch warm and reassuring. "Then that's where we start." They spent the next 3 days at Jasper's ranch, planning their return to redemption and what they would do about Sheriff Donnelly. Jasper provided them with all the evidence he had gathered: Carlton Lewis's letter, copies of ranch transaction records showing suspicious patterns, Rebecca's journal with her observations about the sheriff's behavior. On the morning of their departure, Jasper called Caleb to his room for a private word. "I may not be here when you return," the old man said frankly. "So I want to say this now. Rebecca would be proud of the man you're becoming again, and she would approve of Zara." Caleb felt heat rise to his face. "Mr. Prescott, Zara and I aren't—" "I know what you aren't," Jasper interrupted with a knowing smile. "But I also see what you could be. Don't let grief blind you to the possibility of happiness, son. Rebecca wouldn't have wanted that." Before Caleb could respond, Jasper reached into the drawer of his bedside table and withdrew a small velvet pouch. This was Rebecca's mother's ring. Rebecca wore it until the day she died. I want you to have it. I can't take that, Caleb protested. It should stay in your family. You are my family, Jasper said firmly, pressing the pouch into Caleb's hand. The only family I have left. What you do with it is up to you, but I want you to have it. The ride back to Redemption was faster than their journey out, both Caleb and Zara driven by a sense of purpose that hadn't been there before. They traveled longer each day, talked more easily, and gradually, Caleb felt the fog of grief and whiskey lifting from his mind. On their last night on the trail, camped beside a small stream, Caleb found himself watching Zara as she prepared their simple dinner. There was a grace to her movements, a quiet competence that he'd come to admire over their days together. "What will you do after this is all over?" he asked as they sat by the fire, eating the rabbit stew she'd prepared. Zara looked up, surprised by the question. "I haven't thought that far ahead. Go back to teaching, I suppose. The school in Silverton offered me a position before I left to find you." "Silverton," Caleb repeated. "That's nearly 100 miles from Redemption." "Yes," she agreed, "but there's nothing keeping me in Redemption now. My parents are gone and with Rebecca." She trailed off, then added more softly, "Besides, you'll be back at your ranch. You won't need me anymore." The thought of Zara leaving, of returning to the empty ranch alone, struck Caleb with unexpected force. "What if I asked you to stay?" The question hung between them, loaded with implications neither was quite ready to voice. "Why would you do that?" Zara asked carefully, her eyes reflecting the firelight. Caleb struggled to articulate feelings he was only beginning to recognize. "Because you've helped me find my way back. Because I'm not sure I can do this alone. Because—" He hesitated, then finished honestly, "Because I've come to care for you, Zara, more than I thought possible." She looked down at her hands, a slight flush coloring her cheeks. "Caleb, I don't want to be a replacement for Rebecca. I couldn't bear that." "You could never be a replacement," he assured her, reaching across to take her hand. "Rebecca will always be part of me, part of who I am, but she's gone and I'm still here, still living, thanks to you." Zara's fingers tightened around his. "We should focus on Donnelly first," she said, though her voice held a new warmth. "There will be time for other discussions afterward." Caleb nodded, understanding her need for caution. They were both navigating unfamiliar territory, both wary of missteps. But for the first time in 4 years, he felt hope not just for justice, but for a future that might hold more than grief and solitude. They reached Redemption the following afternoon, riding in from the east as the sun began its descent toward the distant mountains. The town looked much as Caleb had left it, the main street lined with the same buildings, the same dust swirling in the wind, the same sense of a place caught between civilization and wilderness. "We should stable the horses and find rooms at the hotel," Zara suggested as they approached the outskirts. "Better not to draw attention to ourselves until we decide how to proceed." Caleb agreed, though the thought of returning to the Redemption Hotel where he'd spent his first few weeks after leaving the ranch filled him with a strange unease. They left their horses at the livery, collected their few belongings, and walked the short distance to the hotel. The desk clerk, a balding man Caleb vaguely recognized, looked up as they entered. His eyes widened slightly at the sight of Caleb, clean-shaven and sober, alongside Zara. "Mr. Turner," he said, clearly surprised. "Haven't seen you in these parts for some time." "Usually it's the Rusty Nail you frequent." "Things change, Matthews," Caleb replied evenly. "We need 2 rooms if you have them." Of course," the clerk responded, reaching for keys. "Adjacent rooms on the 2nd floor suit you." As they completed the transaction, Caleb noticed the clerk's eyes darting repeatedly to the front window. Following his gaze, Caleb saw a man on horseback passing slowly by Sheriff Donnelly, his star gleaming in the late afternoon sun. "Something wrong, Matthews?" Caleb asked casually. "No, no," the clerk assured him hastily. "Just, surprised to see you back in town proper is all, and with company." Caleb nodded, taking the keys. "People change, Matthews, sometimes for the better." In their respective rooms they freshened up and changed into clean clothes. Caleb found himself staring at his reflection in the small mirror above the washstand, the face looking back at him more familiar than it had been in years, the haunted look in his eyes replaced by something else. Determination, perhaps, or maybe just clarity. A soft knock at the connecting door drew his attention. "Come in," he called, and Zara entered, dressed now in a simple blue dress that brought out the color of her eyes. "I've been thinking," she said without preamble. "We need to be careful how we approach this. Donnelly has been sheriff here for over a decade. People trust him." "People like Matthews downstairs," Caleb agreed, "who looked mighty nervous when Donnelly rode by." "Exactly," Zara nodded. "We need allies, people who might have their own reasons to distrust the sheriff. And we need more evidence than just Carlton Lewis's letter." Caleb considered this. Otto at the Rusty Nail. He hears everything that happens in this town, and he never much liked Donnelly. "Good," Zara approved. "We should talk to him first, and then maybe visit your old ranch tomorrow. See what we're fighting for." The mention of the ranch stirred mixed emotions in Caleb. "Are you sure that's wise? It might be difficult." Zara's expression softened. "It will be. But I think you need to see it, Caleb. Need to remember what was before you can decide what will be." He couldn't argue with her logic, though the thought of seeing the rebuilt ranch house, of walking the land where he'd once been so happy, filled him with both longing and dread. "All right," he agreed. "But first, let's see what Otto knows." The Rusty Nail was quiet when they entered, only a few early patrons scattered at tables. Otto looked up from wiping glasses, his perpetual scowl deepening when he recognized Caleb. "Well, well," the bartender said. "Look what the cat dragged back, and sober no less." "Hello to you too, Otto," Caleb replied, approaching the bar with Zara at his side. "Been a while." "Not long enough for you to have paid your tab," Otto grumbled, though there was a hint of relief in his gruff tone. "Who's the lady?" "This is Miss Wheeler," Caleb introduced. "An old friend." "Must be some friend to get you cleaned up," Otto observed, nodding to Zara. "What can I get you folks, though I'm guessing it ain't whiskey this time?" "Information," Caleb said quietly, leaning on the bar. "About Sheriff Donnelly." Otto's expression shuddered immediately. "Don't know what you're talking about." "I think you do," Caleb pressed. "I think you know exactly what kind of man wears that star." The bartender's eyes darted to the door, then back to Caleb. "Not here," he muttered. "Too many ears, come back after closing, midnight." It was all they could get from him, so they ordered food and ate in relative silence, aware of the curious glances from the few other patrons. Caleb recognized most of them ranchers, cowboys, the same faces he'd seen night after night during his drinking days, though they'd rarely spoken. As they finished their meal, the saloon doors swung open and Sheriff Donnelly himself stepped in. He was a tall man with broad shoulders, his dark hair and beard shot through with gray, his eyes sharp and assessing as they swept the room. Those eyes stopped when they landed on Caleb, surprise and something like wariness flashing across the sheriff's features before he controlled his expression. "Turner," he said, approaching their table. "Heard you were back in town. Cleaned up, I see." "Sheriff," Caleb acknowledged, forcing himself to meet the gaze of the man who, if Jasper's information was correct, had been responsible for Rebecca's death. It took every ounce of his self-control not to reach for the gun now holstered at his hip. And who might this be? Donnelly asked, tipping his hat to Zara. Zara Wheeler, she introduced herself, her voice cool but polite. I'm an old friend of the Prescott family. Ah, Donnelly said, his eyes narrowing slightly. Hear about old Jasper, I suppose. Heard he wasn't long for this world. Among other things, Zara replied non-committally. Donnelly studied them both for a moment longer, then nodded. Well, welcome back to redemption, Turner. Try to stay out of trouble this time. With that, he moved to the bar, ordering a whiskey from Otto. He knows something's up, Zara murmured as they left the saloon. We'll need to be careful. We need to be quick, Caleb corrected. If he suspects why we're really here, he might run, or worse. They returned to the hotel, spending the hours until midnight discussing strategies and reviewing the evidence they had. At 11:45, they slipped out the back entrance of the hotel and made their way through the darkened streets to the Rusty Nail. Otto was waiting for them, the saloon now empty, a single lamp burning on the bar. He looked nervous, his usual gruffness replaced by a wary alertness. Make it quick, he said as they entered. Don't like being seen talking to you, Turner, not with the questions you're asking. What do you know about Donnelly? Caleb asked without preamble. Otto poured himself a drink, downing it in one swallow before answering. I know he ain't what he pretends to be. Been sheriff here 15 years, and in that time, a lot of strange things have happened. Ranches robbed when owners are away. Gold shipments hit when only a few people knew the schedule. Witnesses to crime suddenly changing their stories or leaving town. You think he's corrupt, Zara stated. I know he is, Otto replied, but knowing and proving are different things. Man's got half the town in his pocket one way or another. What about the raid on my ranch? Caleb asked, the question burning in him. The one where my wife was killed. Otto's expression turned grim. Always thought that was suspicious. Blackwell's gang usually hit places where folks weren't home, took valuables and left. That time they went straight for your place when they knew you'd be out checking fences. How'd they know that unless someone told them? Donnelly, Caleb said, the name bitter on his tongue. Can't prove it, Otto cautioned. But yeah, that's my guess. He was asking around about your place the week before. Wanted to know when you'd be moving your cattle to the north pasture, when the house would be empty. The confirmation of what they already suspected sent a surge of anger through Caleb. I need proof, Otto, something that will stick. The bartender hesitated, then reached beneath the bar and pulled out a worn ledger. Been keeping track of things. Dates of raids, who was hit, what was taken. Pattern's pretty clear if you know what to look for. Donnelly always seems to be out of town or just missed the bandits, and he always knows exactly what was stolen, even before the owners report it. This could help, Zara said, flipping through the pages. Combined with Carlton Lewis's letter and the other evidence we have. Lewis, Otto repeated, surprised. The deputy who left town right after your wife was killed. He's involved in this. He wrote a confession, Caleb explained. Said Donnelly was working with Blackwell's gang, telling them which ranches to hit. Said he was too afraid to speak up while he was here. Otto nodded grimly. Man like Donnelly, he'd make sure anyone who knew too much wouldn't live to tell about it. Like your wife, maybe. The implication sent a chill through Caleb. You think Rebecca knew, that's why they killed her. Can't say for sure, Otto admitted. But she was a smart woman, and she wasn't afraid to speak her mind if she suspected something. The possibility that Rebecca had died not just as collateral damage in a robbery, but because she discovered Donnelly's corruption, added a new dimension to Caleb's grief and rage. We need to be careful, Zara warned, seeing the dangerous look in Caleb's eyes. If Donnelly suspects what we know he already does, Otto interrupted, his gaze fixed on the window. And speak of the devil. Through the grimy glass, they could see Sheriff Donnelly across the street, watching the saloon from the shadows of the livery stable. Is there a back way out? Zara asked urgently. Otto nodded toward a door behind the bar. Through the storeroom, comes out in the alley, but he'll know you were here. Let him wonder what we talked about, Caleb said, taking Zara's arm. We'll head back to the hotel. He can't move against us in public, not without showing his hand. They slipped out the back way, keeping to the shadows as they made their way through Redemption's darkened streets. The hotel was quiet when they returned, no sign that Donnelly had followed them. What now? Zara asked as they paused outside their rooms. We stick to the plan, Caleb decided. Visit the ranch tomorrow, gather what additional evidence we can, then take everything to the territorial marshal when he makes his monthly visit next week. And if Donnelly makes a move before then we'll be ready, Caleb assured her, his hand brushing the revolver at his hip. Zara looked as if she wanted to argue, but instead nodded. Be careful, Caleb. I didn't come all this way to find you just to lose you again. The simple statement, laden with meaning neither of them was quite ready to articulate, hung between them. Impulsively, Caleb reached out, drawing her into a brief embrace. Thank you, he murmured into her hair, for finding me, for bringing me back. She pulled away first, her eyes bright with emotion. Get some rest. Tomorrow will be difficult enough without adding exhaustion to it. They parted, each to their own room, but Caleb found sleep elusive. His mind raced with all they'd learned, with the growing certainty that Donnelly had been directly responsible for Rebecca's death, and with the unfamiliar warmth that Zara's presence had awakened in him. Dawn found him at the window, watching as Redemption slowly came to life. Merchants opening their shops, a wagon delivering supplies to the general store, a group of cowboys heading into the Rusty Nail for breakfast after a night on the trail. A knock at his door pulled him from his observations. Come in, he called, expecting Zara. Instead, a young boy stood in the doorway, hat in hand. Mr. Turner got a message for you, sir. From who? Caleb asked, instantly wary. Otto at the saloon, the boy replied, holding out a folded piece of paper. Said it was urgent. Caleb took the note, pressing a coin into the boy's hand before closing the door. The message was brief and alarming. Donnelly asking questions. Says he's riding out to your old place today. Be careful. A cold feeling settled in Caleb's stomach. If Donnelly was heading to the ranch, it could only mean one thing: he was looking for evidence of his own to destroy. Another knock, softer this time, came from the connecting door. Zara entered, already dressed for the day's ride. I just got a message from Otto, she said without preamble. Donnelly's heading to the ranch, Caleb finished, showing her his own note. We need to get there first. They gathered their things quickly and headed for the livery. The stablemen had their horses saddled and ready within minutes, clearly having received instructions from Otto as well. Sheriff rode out about half an hour ago, he informed them as they mounted. Seemed in an awful hurry. Which way did he go? Caleb asked. North Road, the man replied. Same direction as your old spread, Mr. Turner. Caleb nodded his thanks, and they set off at a brisk pace, pushing the horses as much as they dared on the still muddy roads. The Turner Ranch lay about 5 miles north of town, set in a small valley with a creek running through it. As they crested the final rise, Caleb reined in sharply, the sight before him stealing his breath. The ranch house burned to the ground in the raid had been rebuilt, almost exactly as it had been. The barn, the corral, the small garden Rebecca had so lovingly tended, all restored as if the tragedy had never happened. Jasper wanted everything just as it was, Zara explained softly, seeing his expression. Said it was what Rebecca would have wanted. For a moment, Caleb couldn't speak. Overwhelmed by the conflicting emotions the sight evoked: grief for what had been lost, gratitude for what had been preserved, and something else, something like hope for what might yet be. "Donnelly's here," Zara pointed out, indicating a horse tied up outside the barn. "What's the plan?" Caleb considered their options. "We confront him, find out what he's looking for, but carefully, he's dangerous and he knows we're onto him." They approached cautiously, dismounting at the edge of the property and securing their horses out of sight. As they neared the barn, they could hear someone moving inside, the sound of items being shifted and tossed aside. Drawing his revolver, Caleb motioned for Zara to stay behind him as they entered the shadowy interior. Sheriff Donnelly stood at the far end, rifling through a stack of crates, his back to them. "Looking for something, Sheriff?" Caleb called, his voice steady despite the rage burning within him. Donnelly spun around, hand dropping to his holster, but he checked the motion when he saw Caleb's gun already drawn. "Turner, should have known Otto would warn you." "What are you doing here?" Caleb demanded, keeping his distance. "This is private property." "Just checking on things," Donnelly replied smoothly, though his eyes were cold and calculating. "Heard you might be reclaiming your old place. Wanted to make sure everything was in order." "By searching through storage crates?" Zara asked skeptically, stepping up beside Caleb. Donnelly's gaze shifted to her, his expression hardening. "You're causing a lot of trouble, Miss Wheeler. Asking questions around town, digging up old stories best left buried. Like how you helped Blackwell's gang target ranches," Caleb suggested, his finger tightening on the trigger. "Like how you told them when my wife would be alone at our house." Something dangerous flashed in Donnelly's eyes. "You can't prove any of that." "Actually, we can," Zara countered. "We have Carlton Lewis's signed confession. We have records of your movements coinciding with the raids. And we have witnesses who saw you asking specific questions about ranch schedules and valuables." For a moment, Donnelly seemed taken aback by the extent of their evidence. Then his expression shifted, calculating once more. "Lewis is a drunk and a liar," he said dismissively. "And any other evidence you think you have won't stand up in court, not against the word of a sheriff who's served this town faithfully for 15 years. "We'll let the territorial marshal decide that," Caleb replied. "He'll be here next week. I'm sure he'll be very interested in what we have to say." Donnelly laughed, the sound harsh in the quiet barn. "You really think you'll last that long? Accidents happen, Turner, especially to men who can't let go of the past." The threat hung in the air between them, clear and unmistakable. "Is that what happened to Rebecca?" Caleb asked, his voice dangerously quiet. "An accident." Something like regret flashed across Donnelly's face, quickly replaced by defiance. "Your wife was never supposed to be there. The house was meant to be empty. She surprised them, tried to fight back." It wasn't personal. The casual dismissal of Rebecca's death ignited a fury in Caleb unlike anything he'd felt before. His finger tightened on the trigger, the desire to end Donnelly's life right there nearly overwhelming. "Caleb, no," Zara said urgently, her hand on his arm. "Not like this. He needs to face justice properly, for everyone he's hurt." Her touch and her words penetrated the red haze of his anger. She was right. Killing Donnelly would bring a momentary satisfaction but would ultimately solve nothing. The truth would die with him, and Caleb would become just another murderer. "You're under arrest, Donnelly," he said instead, steadying his aim, "for conspiracy to commit robbery and for the murder of Rebecca Turner." Donnelly's hand moved in a blur, drawing his revolver with the speed of a man who'd survived many such confrontations. But years of drinking had not completely erased Caleb's reflexes. He fired first, his bullet striking Donnelly's shoulder, causing the sheriff's shot to go wild, splintering a beam above Zara's head. The sheriff staggered back, clutching his wounded shoulder, his gun falling from nerveless fingers. "You've made a mistake, Turner," he growled. "A fatal one." "The only mistake was thinking you'd get away with this forever," Caleb replied, approaching cautiously to kick Donnelly's weapon away. "Zara, there's rope hanging by the door. We need to secure him until we can get him back to town." As Zara moved to retrieve the rope, Donnelly suddenly lunged, not for Caleb but for her, a hidden knife appearing in his good hand. Caleb reacted instinctively, throwing himself between them, feeling the blade slice into his side even as he brought the butt of his revolver down hard on Donnelly's temple. The sheriff collapsed, unconscious, as Caleb staggered back, hand pressed to his bleeding side. "Caleb!" Zara cried, rushing to his side. "How bad is it?" "Not deep," he assured her, though the pain was considerable. "Just a cut. Bind him first, then you can look at this." With Donnelly securely tied, Zara turned her attention to Caleb's wound. She helped him remove his shirt, examining the gash with a critical eye. "You're right, it's not too deep," she confirmed, relief evident in her voice. "But it needs cleaning and bandaging. There should be supplies in the house." They made their way to the ranch house, Caleb leaning on Zara more than he would have liked to admit. Inside, he was struck anew by the careful restoration, the furniture arranged just as it had been. Rebecca's favorite quilt draped over the rocking chair by the fireplace, even the same curtains hanging in the windows. "How did Jasper know?" he asked as Zara helped him sit at the kitchen table. "How did he know exactly how everything was?" "Rebecca kept a detailed journal," Zara explained, searching through cupboards for medical supplies. "And I remembered a lot from my visits here. Between the two of us, we were able to recreate most of it." The care that had gone into preserving this piece of his past touched Caleb deeply. As Zara cleaned and bandaged his wound, he found himself seeing the house not just as a monument to what he'd lost, but as a place where new memories could be made. "What will you do now?" Zara asked as she finished tying the bandage. "With Donnelly captured and the ranch yours again," Caleb caught her hand before she could pull away. "That depends," he said softly. "On what?" "On whether you meant what you said about second chances." Their eyes met, understanding passing between them. "I meant it," Zara assured him, her voice barely above a whisper. "Every word." Caleb stood, ignoring the twinge in his side, and drew her closer. "Then I think I'd like to rebuild my life here, but I don't want to do it alone." "Caleb," Zara began, uncertainty in her expression. "I don't want to be a replacement for you're not," he interrupted gently. "You never could be. Rebecca will always be part of my past, part of who I am. But you, Zara, you're my present, and if you'll have me, my future." Tears welled in her eyes, but she was smiling. "Is that a proposal, Caleb Turner?" "It's a beginning," he replied, reaching into his pocket for the velvet pouch Jasper had given him. "The proposal comes later when we've had time to be sure, but this—" He pressed the pouch into her hand. "This is a promise that I'm done running from life, done drowning my grief, ready to start living again with you." Zara opened the pouch, gasping softly as Rebecca's mother's ring fell into her palm. "Caleb, I can't." "You can," he assured her. "Jasper gave it to me for a reason. He said Rebecca would approve of you, and I believe he's right." Tears spilled onto Zara's cheeks as she closed her fingers around the ring. "Keep it safe for now," she said. "When the time is right, when we're both ready, then ask me properly." Caleb smiled, drawing her into a careful embrace. "I will," he promised. "But know that my heart is already decided." Their lips met in a gentle kiss, tentative at first, then deepening as years of unacknowledged feelings finally found expression. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathless and smiling. "We should get Donnelly back to town," Zara reminded him, though she made no move to leave his arms, "and send word to the territorial marshal." "Yes," Caleb agreed reluctantly, "but we'll come back, start fresh here if that's what you want." "It is," she assured him. "More than anything." With Donnelly secured on his own horse, they made the journey back to Redemption, where the news of the sheriff's arrest and the evidence of his crimes spread quickly through the town. Otto stepped forward as a witness, as did several others who had long suspected but feared to speak out against the corrupt lawman. A telegram was sent to the territorial marshal, who arrived within days rather than the expected week. The evidence was overwhelming, and Donnelly was taken to stand trial in Cheyenne, where he would eventually be sentenced to hang for his role in multiple murders, including Rebecca Turner's. In the months that followed, Caleb and Zara rebuilt not just the ranch but their lives. The whiskey cravings gradually subsided as Caleb found purpose in working the land again, in making plans for the future, in learning to love again without betraying the memory of his first love. Jasper Prescott lived long enough to see them married the following spring, the ceremony held on the ranch with the whole town in attendance. He gave Zara away, his eyes bright with tears of joy despite his weakened condition. 2 weeks later, he passed peacefully in his sleep, secure in the knowledge that his daughter's legacy would continue. As for the ring, Caleb did indeed propose properly, on a summer evening as they sat on the porch of the ranch house, watching the sunset paint the Wyoming sky in shades of gold and pink. Zara accepted without hesitation the love that had grown between them over the months, strong and true, built on shared grief but focused on shared hope. "You think she would approve?" Zara asked that night as they stood by the small garden she had replanted in Rebecca's memory. "Truly." "I know she would," Caleb replied, his arm around his new wife's waist. "Rebecca believed in love, in second chances, in living fully no matter what." "Then we'll honor her by doing just that," Zara promised, leaning into his embrace, and they did. Over the years, the Turner Ranch flourished, becoming one of the most successful in the territory. Children came first, a daughter they named Rebecca, then a son they called Jasper, and finally another daughter, Grace. The house that had once been filled with grief became a home overflowing with laughter and love. Caleb never forgot Rebecca or the child they'd lost, but the sharp edge of grief gradually softened into a bittersweet remembrance. With Zara by his side, he found a happiness he'd once thought impossible, a life rich with purpose and meaning. And sometimes, in the quiet moments, as he watched Zara reading to their children or tending the garden or simply standing at the window with the sunset in her hair, Caleb would remember that night in his dilapidated cabin, when she'd poured out his bottle and sat beside him, refusing to let him drown in his sorrow. That simple act of determination and compassion had changed everything, had brought him back from the brink, had given him a reason to live again. For that, and for all that had come after, he would be forever grateful.